Welcome, friends. In today's episode, I'll be speaking with Cynthia Kane, the founder and CEO of the Kane Intentional Communication Institute, which provides services to help individuals and companies improve their communication skills and show up authentically in their most important relationships. She actually has an entire book on the topic of today's conversation, How to Communicate Like a Buddhist. Cynthia will share tips to help all of us connect more authentically, plus she puts communication in the context of skillful speech, a vital part of Buddhist teachings. If you enjoy our conversation, please share this episode and subscribe. To learn more about Buddhism through my free courses or my book for beginners, The Buddhist Path to Joy, please see the episode notes. May you and all beings be well. So thank you so much, Cynthia Kane, for joining me today. I'm really excited to hear about your intentional communication method, but I wanted to just start with asking you, how did you come to Buddhism and right speech and your whole field of practice now? How did you arrive there?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here with you. So I got here in a very roundabout way. It wasn't like there was no clear path. I really came to the work that I'm doing now and to Buddhism through losing my first love, really unexpectedly. And, before that time, I didn't know much about Buddhism. I didn't know anything about right speech. I was extremely passive aggressive and very reactionary and very judgmental, and just had a lot of difficulty in silence and with myself, right? There wasn't a lot of gentleness towards myself or friendliness towards myself. And when I lost Mauricio is his full name, my whole world just really, I often liken it to like a blank canvas. I really just felt completely blank, and I had no idea what belonged on that canvas anymore.
Just for context, what age were you?
So I was 30.
Okay. So, the Buddha left home at 29. 30 sounds like a classic age to discover, oh my God.
Yeah.
What is this?
Yeah.
Life thing.
And so it was exactly that. It was like, what is happening? It was like, I couldn't understand why the rest of the world was functioning and I was not functioning.
Yeah. Yeah. Such a good question after a loss like that.
Yeah. And I just remember that, like, the questioning and wondering, what is this all about? And how, getting into the questions that really weren't helpful. And then understanding that if I was going to move through this, I was going to have to figure out how to do that and how to feel better. Mm-hmm. And so that's when I started, reading a lot and going to lectures and all of those things. And a friend of mine suggested going to a meditation and writing workshop and at the Shambhala Institute when I was in New York, and I was trying everything. So I went, and that weekend completely changed my world. That's where I learned meditation, and then I learned the elements of right speech in Buddhism. And I was like, this is my way through this suffering. It was the first time I was able to sit with the sadness and the heartache and the anxiety and the fear, and also like the beauty of the world and like how amazing, life is. And it was just like the first time I was able to be in contrast, to exist in contrast, and it'd be okay, not be right or wrong,
right?
Which was very powerful. And I remember leaving that weekend being like, this is it. Like, this is my way through.
Mm-hmm.
And then the question became, how in the world do I do this?
Right.
Like, this all sounds really amazing. Like, I want to be honest. I want to be kind. I want to be helpful. I don't want to gossip. I don't want to judge, like all the things.
Yeah.
Beautiful, very simple. And then I had no idea how to do it. And so that really is what created this practice, was this experiment of like understanding I needed to change the way that I was communicating with myself to then change how I was interacting with others, so that then the world around me wouldn't be so scary anymore.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's really what started me on all this. And I started writing about what I was practicing and seeing all the changes that were happening in my relationships with others, with myself. And then I started teaching it, and the demand for it was really high. And so then I created more and more and more. And that's really how it all kind of came together. And it's not something, when I was younger, I thought that I would teach people how to communicate in a more intentional way. And yet it is truly my heart's passion, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it is what I feel like I was brought here to do through a really unexpected and unwanted event, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's how I got here, basically.
I think it's just beautiful that you took this, event and made something that's been so beneficial to so many people out of it. I mean, I think that's like very deeply Buddhist, and in other spiritual traditions as well. But, the idea of like the Bodhisattva, for instance, who has vowed to keep living this life in order to help everyone else live it too.
Yeah.
There's that kind of like bittersweet, appreciation of what the world is.
Yeah. And it is that it's helping people feel better in the world, and helping them understand suffering, and being able to change the relationship to suffering, so that suffering is not something that suffocates, right? But suffering is something that you can connect with differently to reach another place that feels easier. So yeah.
I think so often, a lot of traditional like religious or spiritual traditions had ways of like transforming that suffering that happens in life into something other than just kind of this gaping hole that feels like it's going to swallow us up. And I feel like in modern life, often we've really lost that. So it's great to see, there's so many different approaches, but like to see an interpersonal approach to that, which is really based on mindfulness and growing out of the Dharma. But it seems, from what I understand about it, very accessible to everybody. Like, you don't have to be a Buddhist to be able to practice right speech.
No, you don't. And it really is, it changes your relationships, right? It changes, it brings way more connection and helps you learn how to navigate difficult interactions, and, how to really have be able to express yourself so that people can hear you. And you don't have to be a Buddhist to be able to apply these principles, right? And it really is, though, learning Buddhist principles. Like, that's what you're really doing. You're learning Buddhist principles, right? And mindfulness practices to help you access really the parasympathetic nervous system, so that then you can connect calmly, compassionately, and consciously, right? And meditation is such a big part of communication in that, right? Informal practice, that moment where we're distracted and then we move ourselves back, that is truly communication, right? When you are talking with someone else, you can get distracted. You get distracted into your thoughts. You get distracted in what the other person is saying. Why aren't they saying this? I should be saying this. They should be saying this. Like, all the things, right? That's all distraction. And so the like that beautiful moment when you're like, oh my gosh, like I am not here with this other person. I am not present with them. I'm not being helpful in this moment. I'm not being supportive in this moment. I'm not being honest in this moment. I'm just going to notice that. Thanks so much. I'm going to come back and be here. Right. So, and the practice itself that's the other thing too, I think, is that it is a practice, right? Communication is a practice, just like, Buddhism is a practice in a lot of ways, right? Daily. And so it really mirrors, it is grounded in the elements of right speech. So, yeah.
Yeah. And maybe this is a good time to ask, what is your understanding of right speech? I feel like it's one of the Noble Eightfold Path.
Yeah.
It's super important. And nowadays there's so many different ways of communicating, not just face to face.
Yeah.
So what is your kind of pith teaching or understanding about what is right speech?
So right speech, the way I teach it is really it's being honest, right? To be honest, to use helpful language, to not gossip and not exaggerate. And so it truly is, if you feed everything through the lens of like, is this kind, honest, helpful, and necessary? If the answer is yes, then it falls in line with right speech, right? And oftentimes people will say, well, they'll say something and it's kind, but it's not honest. Right. Or it's not helpful, or they'll say something that's honest, but it's not kind. And so, it's so simple when you say it out loud, but then when you start to really get into it, there's a lot of complexity there, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it could be like one of my teachers, I forget who, actually said one time, if you try to practice right speech, like with as much detail and granularity as possible, that's like a complete practice right there.
Yes. And I would say that is 100% my practice. That is all I practice. Because I believe that like practicing right speech embodies the other practices, right? Like the other pieces on the Eightfold Path. And it keeps me aligned to those, right? So, yeah.
One thing I really appreciate too about the emphasis you have on communication and relationships is I feel like often in Western convert Dharma communities, or just Western communities in general, it tends to be really focused on the individual. I sit and meditate, I get up and leave, and that's what people think of as Dharma practice. Whereas traditionally it was much more communal, much more about, what you do with your neighbors and your teachers and your fellow practitioners. So I really appreciate that aspect of what you're doing and really focusing on, it's not just the inward gaze, it's also the relational gaze.
Yes. And I think that often what happens is when we practice, when we meditate, the moment that we're finished, sometimes it's surprising that what we are experiencing within meditation does not follow us, right? Like, that, like the calm that we may feel sometimes, or the freedom that we may feel, and then we have an interaction with someone at the grocery store or with our partner, and suddenly we're just completely frustrated, we're lashing out, we're getting passive aggressive, and we're like, whoa, that's the complete opposite of like where I just was. And so sometimes the question is, well, how do I bring what is happening in meditation out into my personal relationships, right? And while meditation, I truly believe, is helpful in so many ways, what it does not give you is the expression part, right? Yes. Like, you're not talking in meditation, you're learning. It's an interesting thing, but like, you're learning in meditation how to interact with others, but the talking piece isn't there. You have to combine meditation with expression, right? Like, so you have to start to implement the awareness in your interactions, to start listening to yourself in your interactions, listening to the sensation in the body when you're connected with somebody to understand, like, is this comfortable? Is this uncomfortable? Just like when you're in meditation, right? You're aware of sensation in the body. In an interaction, becoming aware of sensation. What is it telling you, right? Like, how is it talking to you? Is it like a cue for you becoming passive aggressive or a cue for you lashing out? And then being able to see that, talk to yourself differently in the moment, access the present moment, then you can see the other person clearly and then express yourself and talk, right? And so there's a whole other practice off the cushion that has to be practiced for the elements of right speech to truly, be worked, basically.
Yeah.
So.
And I just kind of want to underscore here for anyone who's listening and thinking like, oh, that's not like a serious, hardcore meditative practice or whatever. Right. Like, the whole point is that practice informs the rest of your life. So if you're only focused on, I sit and I can keep my mind on an object and it doesn't wander for an hour, like, that's amazing. But if you get up and you're yelling at your partner,
yeah,
there's a disconnect there.
There is. And it's, because the whole, for me personally, I feel like the love affair I have with Buddhism, basically, is the connection with others, is that compassion, is the presence, like that. To me, being able to have that in relationships, it makes them so much more enjoyable, right? So for me, it really is about connecting with other people. It really is about community. It really is about, and not just like Sangha community, right?
Right.
But really being able to connect on a different level in that realm, if that makes sense.
It does. I think, my sense of where sort of the at least the American Buddhist community is right now is there's a lot of, especially since 2020 and the whole sort of racial reckoning and just the exposure of all the inequalities in society. Like, for those who weren't already aware of them, it just seems like one of the questions around Dharma practice is, okay, but how does it translate out to this bigger picture? And, I feel like you're really underscoring one of the extremely traditional ways that it is designed to translate out.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, could you maybe connect the dots for people? You mentioned this intentional communication starts with the way you talk to yourself.
Yeah.
So could you connect, what happens in your personal practice on the cushion, how you talk to yourself and how that translates out?
Yeah. So when you're on the cushion and you have the moments where you are off somewhere else, right? And we do bring ourselves back to our anchor or whatever, wherever our attention is at that moment. It's really easy in that moment to have like a critical voice where it's like, you've been doing this for so long, you really should not be so distracted right now, right? Like stop thinking about that, come back, right? And that voice is really, it's like a judgmental voice. It's not such a nice voice, right? And that is the same voice that when you are connecting with someone else and maybe, they're letting you know that they would really love it if, you would help out more with taking out the trash, let's just say. And in your mind, you're talking to yourself and you're like, I'm the worst. Like, that's horrible of me. I wasn't even thinking about that other person, or I can't believe they are even thinking that about me, or they think I'm so selfish, or they think that I don't care about them, right? Like there's that judgmental voice that's there. In meditation, that moment where we're gone and then we notice, if we use just like a really gentle, friendly, kind, loving voice that's like, oh, that's all right, sweetheart. We're okay. Like, let's come back to what we were doing. Like, really gentle, really friendly. That then translates out, right? Mm-hmm. So that you are in an interaction. Somebody says something like about the trash, and then you're aware of the sensation in your body, and you start talking to yourself differently. You're like, oh gosh, you're feeling really stupid right now. Mm-hmm. Like, you're feeling really invisible right now. It's all right. We're good. Let's just take a breath. Let's come back to the present moment. What are our hands doing? What are our feet doing? And here we are, right? So like, that's one instance. Another is sensation in the body, right? Within practice, just becoming aware of like the feeling tone, right? What is a pleasant sensation? What's a neutral sensation? What's an uncomfortable sensation? And in practice, sometimes with the pleasant sensation, the want is to hold on to it or like want more of it, but can we just enjoy it, right? The neutral are those places that maybe we disconnect from. Mm-hmm. And instead of disconnecting, can we become maybe more curious about those? Mm-hmm. And then the uncomfortable ones that we want to like push away and resist or fix or change, can we treat that as like, something we want to nurture or like love? And when we do that in meditation, then outside meditation, when we're in these interactions, right? Somebody says something, oh, there's that uncomfortable feeling inside. Mm-hmm. I'm going to nurture that feeling. I'm going to be kind to that feeling. I'm not going to push it away. I'm not going to resist it. I'm not going to go over here, right? I'm just going to soothe myself so that then I can come back to the present and I can see the person as somebody that I care for, right? Yeah. Or, you're in a relationship and it feels really lovely and good. And instead of being like, I want more of this, like, I need to cling to this, I need to attach to this, right? It's like, oh, can I just enjoy this moment? So you really learn in your meditation practice how to connect in your personal life. It's just a matter of being aware of those things and learning how to do it, because it's a different practice than, formal meditation.
Yeah, it's different. And yet, as you're explaining it, part of what I'm realizing is like, if you think of the main, mission of Buddhism as like unraveling this sense of self, like the self we think is there, but it's actually, there's nothing there. We unravel that self to get down to like who we like truly are. Tara Brach uses the example of a Buddha in Thailand. It was this clay Buddha, very beloved, and they had a big drought in Bangkok, and the clay started cracking. And, what they discovered was underneath that clay was actually golden Buddha that had been covered with clay to protect it during an invasion. And I feel like often we're identified with that clay.
Yeah.
And, so if you think of the sort of mission of Buddhism as to like peel back that clay gently and get down to that gold, I'm really struck by how much of that sense of false self we hold together with the way we communicate, to ourselves, to other people. The exact example that you just gave, could you maybe take out the trash a little bit more often? Yeah. It's so easy to hold together a sense of self who's a victim. Oh, you want me to do everything? Or, in all of those senses of self, whether they're I'm better than you, I'm worse than you, they're all keeping us trapped.
Yeah.
And it's really powerful to think about it in the context of communication. What self am I creating? What self am I putting on you? How am I holding an inaccurate vision of the world together with my communication?
Yeah. And I think that that's such a beautiful way of putting it, because so much of it's wanting to make solid what isn't, right? And it's like so much of this work to speak intentionally in a kind, honest, and helpful way is to learn really how to like open your palms, right? Not keep them clenched, but like open your palms, soften that exterior, and be like, understand that it is like it's okay to do that, right? That there's no need to defend or explain or, you know, make excuses. It's really that honesty piece. And so much of that is really being able to like break out of that protective layer. Yeah.
I'm just wondering, I mean, when I start thinking about creating and sort of shoring up a sense of self, I start thinking about all the other ways we communicate now, like online and, you know, and I know that's one of the things you've thought and talked about. So what are your kind of, I don't know, go-to strategies, or how do you teach people to be more loving in their communication online too?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I push people first off not to be not to be loving online, but not to be communicating so much over text or online platforms. I really push people that I work with to pick up the phone, to talk to people in person. And I know that, you know, in work environments, that's not always the case, and same thing in personal relationships for sure. Though I do believe that it is best. With the interesting thing is that when you start to learn these practices online, like it's much easier to see when you are talking too much, like when you are saying things that are not necessary in text. So when you're writing an email to somebody, or if you're writing text, you can really start to see very easily, like, is this helpful? Is this kind? Is this honest? Is this necessary? Right? Like, what does the other person really need to understand from what I'm saying? What am I trying to actually say? Because a lot of times we don't really think about what it is that we are talking about, right? Or why we're saying what we're saying. And so it gives you the opportunity to really think about what you want to say, what you want the outcome of the interaction to potentially be, so that then you can be really conscious of the words you're choosing or how you're choosing it. And when it comes though to, let's say, like commenting on things, again, I wish that, it's so funny because people ask me this question a lot about like communicating online, and I want to be like, it's different. I want to be like, it's different online. You need to like do X, Y, and Z, but it's not different. It's like the exact same thing. You're using the exact same practice and process to understand if the way that you're connecting with other people is helpful, right? And it requires us to be 100% responsible for our words, our actions, our reactions, you know, all of it. And I think that that's really the biggest piece. It's giving yourself like that space and that time to really think in the moment, is this keeping the integrity of the conversation intact? Right? Is this my responsibility? Because in a conversation, even if it's online, over text, what have you, everyone has a responsibility within a conversation, within an interaction, right? Like, my responsibility is to pay attention to the words I'm using, how I'm using silence, my reactions, my facial expressions, my body language. The other person is responsible for their reactions, their language, their facial expressions, their silence, all that. And all we have in common is like the health of the conversation. And so over text or online or in person, if you notice that it is becoming hurtful, that's when you understand, okay, this is no longer going in the right direction, right? My job is to have a healthy conversation. This either means that I need to leave the conversation. This means I need to redirect the conversation. This means that maybe I put the other person in an uncomfortable place, or they don't feel very comfortable right now. How can I, connect with them differently? So you're using all these, you're using all these tools and all these practices to be able to see, is this hurtful or helpful? Mm-hmm. Right? Because within intentional communication and the elements of right speech, the idea is really the purpose of communicating is to help yourself and others suffer less. And so you're just kind of constantly coming back to that as almost like your thesis statement, mm-hmm. right? Like, is this helping this person? Is this helping me? Is this hurtful to me? Is this hurtful to them? Mm-hmm. Right? So, yeah.
I have an easier time understanding how mindfulness and awareness, attention to the body and sensations is so crucial. Yeah. Because that's so much to monitor in real time.
Yes. And so it starts with the body. Communication starts with the body, mm-hmm. because your body is your cue, right? And most of the time when we work with people, with students, they want to get rid of their reactions, right? Like their default reactions. We all have them. I'm like the best passive aggressive person in the world. But like they're really, I often tell people that they're really your superpowers because they're your cue. Like the sensation before you lash out or become passive aggressive, mm-hmm. that's your cue to know that you are about to do that. Mm-hmm. So it starts in the body. And then it's really important to be able to understand what is a good feeling in the body, what's not a good feeling in the body, what's a neutral feeling, right? Mm-hmm. And we only get there when we sit in meditation and we understand sensation, right? Like what does that feel like? Where is that located in my body? Mm-hmm. And you start to take that observer role, right? Mm-hmm. That you have in meditation where you don't feel like you're there, but you're there, and you're seeing, but you're not seeing, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what ends up happening in your interactions. You become more the observer. So you're not caught in the language anymore of somebody else. You're able to see what's happening so that you can interact like without being driven by the emotion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Kind of maintaining your own, I don't want to say equanimity necessarily, but like a little bit of stability from the inside.
Definitely. Yeah. It's being able, the way how some people will talk about how with meditation, it's this like the sensation or like the idea where you can be in all this chaos and still feel calm inside. Mm-hmm. Right. And that's the same when you're talking to other people. It's like that can create a lot of inner chaos. Mm-hmm. And how can we access calm and rest within the body while still feeling chaotic, mm-hmm. right? Like, how can we expand our capacity for discomfort? And like, how can we sit in that discomfort? And that's what we do in meditation. And that's really what it is when you're in conversations with other people. You're really paying attention to, whoa, this is uncomfortable for me. Can I sit with this? Mm-hmm. Instead of react to it, I mean, you do talk to it, like you talk to the discomfort, right? If something is really bothering you, like it's all about expressing what is bothering you and all of that. That's the communication piece of it. But the first part is not speaking. The first part is truly listening to yourself and how you're talking to yourself and the sensation in the body. And then once you understand all that, then you can move to actually listening to somebody else. Because you can't really hear anybody if you're not truly present and like empty,
Yeah. I think a lot of us too, for whatever reasons during our childhood, we get used to not listening to ourselves.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And then it makes it really difficult to get back in touch and communicate with ourselves, let alone anyone else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's true. And it's hard to listen to ourselves for so many reasons, right? And oftentimes we can hear ourselves, but then we don't trust what we're hearing and we just kind of like push it away. And, a lot of times we suppress our emotions and feelings. And so we don't even know what it is that we're feeling. And I think that so one of the pieces within the work we do is there's specific meditations that are really helpful for communication. And one of the meditations that's really great for listening to yourself is just self-inquiry meditation, right? Because it's not about the answers. It's really about starting to see yourself as somebody that knows the answers to those questions, and to really just start asking the questions. And I often say that you want to become the person who knows 100% about yourself, right? Like, so that you have the answers for you and nobody else, right? Because nobody else knows your answers. But it's remembering that, we do know, and we can tell ourselves, oh, I don't know. But again, that's talking to ourselves in a way that's really unhelpful and distracting us from being able to know, right? So, yeah.
And I just want to say, you do have a YouTube channel with some guided meditations. So anyone who wants to kind of sample this approach, I can link that in the show notes for this episode.
Yeah.
And also, you have entire courses where you teach this.
Yes.
This is not like a simple, easy beginner skill.
No, it's not a simple, easy beginner skill, but anybody can learn how to do it, right? So we have the training program, which is a 15-week program, which really teaches how to do this, right? It really, you're spending, 15 weeks really understanding not only what the practice is, but then implementation, because it's all about implementing and practicing. So you're learning how to listen to yourself. You're learning how to change the way that you talk to yourself. You're learning how to really be able to be with another person who may have different opinions than you and stay in the room and have a conversation. You're learning how to speak consciously and clearly and concisely. You're learning how to use silence, not as like a way to punish or power over somebody, but as a way to really collaborate, or use that silence to know, is this helpful? Is this hurtful? Am I wanting to stay in this conversation? Am I wanting to leave the conversation? And you're learning really how to have difficult conversations to expand your capacity for discomfort. And, by the end, it really is phenomenal to watch people work through it, because they really embody Buddhist, like, it's like, I'm like, oh, there's all these little Buddhas walking around. That's what it looks like to me. But again, you don't have to be Buddhist to do it, but everybody who leaves way more responsive than reactive, right? Like, they understand how to connect, not driven by emotion, right? And really not get caught in the language, but be able to observe it and be able to say what they need to say. And that's it. Like, no longer fearing other people's reactions and things like that hold them back from expressing themselves. They have a meditation practice, and it's beautiful to watch. So yes, it's a 15-week, program. And then there's also shorter, audio courses on how to communicate like a Buddhist that we have, and talking to yourself like a Buddhist as well. But yeah, and it's real.
Yeah, it's wonderful. It's a great set of resources. I would like to go back to a pair of words you just used, which I think is important for your work, being responsive versus reactive.
Yeah.
Could you say more about what that is and what it means to your work?
Yeah. So, reactive is, saying things really automatically. Everything happens so quickly that we just react, that, it just automatically comes out. And that's what the majority of us do. Right. And we say things we don't mean, then we regret what we've said. We wish we would have said things that we didn't say, those types of things. Mm-hmm. And then the responsive piece is really what we're working toward, right? Which is to actually think before you speak. I know it sounds like, I remember when I first started in all this, and my mom was like, so you're asking me to think before I say something? And I'm like, yes. And it was like, way to put it. It was, but that's really what it is. It's that space between, I wish I remember the quote, but there's the quote about like the space between, the event and the stimulus or the response. I don't know.
Yeah, the stimulus and response, and in that space is where our freedom lies.
Yes. So that space is what this work does. It creates that gap so that you can respond, because people always be like, just pause and then say something. And you're like, great, but how do you actually pause, right? This work teaches you how to get to the place to pause so that then you can express yourself, which is very important, right? So you become less reactive and more responsive so that you're actually heard and you're actually having conversation. And it's not just, a one-way conversation or information sharing, but you're truly having meaningful conversations again.
Yeah. Which I feel is just such an important part of like where we are collectively right now. Mm-hmm. Such deep differences sometimes even between, friends and family and partners. I also just kind of want to like stop and put like a traditional Buddhist pin in these ideas of, reacting versus responding. I feel like you could say, that immediate knee-jerk reaction, it's just completely karmically conditioned.
Yeah.
It's our entire history, our background, what we've done thousands of times before in a certain situation, and like the whole Buddhist project is like karma is that wheel of suffering that just is going to keep rolling on its own. And our job is to maybe like slow it down a little tiny bit and to create that gap, like you're saying, because that, reaction, it doesn't leave space for compassion. It doesn't leave space for wisdom. And I hear a lot of compassion and wisdom in what you're talking about, toward ourselves, toward others. And it's a really wonderful, I think, complement to like the way you see the Dharma presented in a modern context, to also find a way to like, slow down and apply this to communication, which can ripple out through the whole rest of our lives.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. So I have, this might sound like a completely random question, but this is something you mentioned, when you talked about right speech, and it's a very traditional element, but I think maybe trickier nowadays, which is gossip.
Yeah.
How do you define gossip in your work?
So I define it as there's a few ways. One is if you are talking with somebody and sharing something with them, let's say you're talking about a coworker or a friend, if that friend were with you, right? Like if they were in the room with you, would you still be sharing that information? Right? Like that's one of the pieces to define gossip, right? And the thing with gossip is usually it's judging, right? Like there's usually judgment there. There is usually like an exaggeration there in terms of it being, it's either we're talking about somebody else in an exaggerated way to make us feel better, or it makes us feel worse. And then the other is, would you talk about like this person this way in front of your child as well, right? If you had a kid, if you have a kid. But the idea really with gossip is that it's all judgment, right? Or it's being the phrases or what you're saying is happening out of a need to feel better or less than. And the opposite of that is just statements, right? So it would be something like, wow, I can't believe she's always late.
Mm-hmm.
That could be gossip, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or you just say, she's late today.
Mm-hmm.
That's a different way, right? But it's really, that's the way I see it. That's the way I usually talk to it. But it is hard nowadays because I think people really bond over gossip.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really uncomfortable in the beginning when people start to see how much their relationships are based in talking about other people.
Mm-hmm.
And it changes, once you start implementing these practices, it changes your relationships with people. And there are some relationships that no longer feel as fulfilling, or it's not that they no longer feel that way. It's just you start to realize that they never really were, or you want more from those relationships. And so the beautiful thing is that you start to see, well, I don't want to only connect in this way. I want to have different kinds of conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And so then you get to be the one to guide the conversation differently.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So if you're around other people who gossip, I used to gossip all the time. I loved it. I really did. And, to this day, my sister gets so frustrated with me now because she's like, I just loved it when you would sit here and like gossip with me, And it's like, I totally understand that, but it's not helpful, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not helpful for me. It's not helpful or kind to the person that I'd be talking about or talking to.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not necessary.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not honest either, right? So it doesn't align with the elements of right speech.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it's a hard one. It's a hard one, to hit head on. And I think that in the beginning for people, it's just being able to excuse themselves from those situations, or being able to say, this actually makes me feel really uncomfortable. Could we talk about something else? Or, I have students just say, I'm in this training and we're playing around with not gossiping. And so, I just want to try it for like the next 5 days and see how it goes. Like it can be like that too, but yeah.
Yeah. I think for me, sometimes gossip about, I don't know, celebrities or politics or something like that, it can seem like a victimless crime because like,
Right.
I don't know these people.
Yeah.
But like at the end of the day, there's still some like residue of just that like ickiness
Yeah.
of, finding that like drama in someone else's life so delicious that you want to talk about it. And, if you're training your mind to be like clear and calm and open and compassionate, there is something about that process of, Schadenfreude of taking
Yeah.
some kind of joy in someone else's pain, even
Mhm.
that is not really, it's not aligned with the Dharma.
Yeah, it isn't. And I think that it's, in those moments where it seeps in, I often just try to go right to sympathetic joy. Like I just try to just be like, all right, like, I'm going to extend this and see, what is this person doing that, maybe I also want to be doing, or what is, getting to kind of the root of like, why am I saying these things? Although I don't love the question why. That's one of the ones that doesn't get you anywhere.
Yeah. I think that idea of, first of all, even noticing the behavior and then like substituting something else for it.
Yeah.
It's just so liberative,
Mm-hmm.
to feel in your body and in your mind the difference between, ooh, did you hear about XYZ? And like, may they be well,
Yeah.
you know?
It feels
Like, I'm
so
sure they've
different.
done something wonderful today. Maybe they give their kid
Yeah.
something that brought them joy.
Mm-hmm.
May they be well.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it changes the feeling in the body.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
This has been just such a wonderful kind of short guided tour through what you do and what you offer. I'm just curious, do you have any kind of, couple of top tips for people when they're relating to themselves, maybe in meditation or relating to others, to help keep that, that right speech kind of fresh and going rather than falling into less skillful speech?
Yeah. I think that, I mean, when it comes to with ourselves, it really is just paying attention to the ways that we're talking to ourselves that are helpful or hurtful, right? And starting to notice what language is creating more, doubt or fear or anxiety in the body, and what language opens the body and helps it feel more expansive. And when noticing like the talk that isn't helpful or causing more suffering, to just be able to be like, oh, there you are again. I see you. Thanks so much. I understand you're here. And now I'm just going to see, like, can I talk to myself in a kind, honest, and helpful way? Right. And then when it comes with, connecting with others, I think one thing is really just to see if you can truly notice your distraction. And have a kind, gentle voice bringing you back to the present so that you're with the other person, just asking yourself internally, like, how can I be helpful to this person right now? Right. I think those are good places to begin.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I'll have links to your books, to the institute you've created for intentional communication. And I hope that, this can inspire people to begin to notice more how they communicate with themselves, with others, maybe talk to themselves and everyone else more like a Buddhist.
Yeah.
Thank you.